So welcome everybody. We're super glad you're here today. This second session of the Teaching Tune-Up, in the second sessions of the Teaching Tune-Up, we're going to be talking about assignments that promote student autonomy and authority. I'm going to talk about a bunch of these assignments, and then I'm going to ask us to collaborate to share some other ideas that we might use to promote autonomy and authority. Does anybody need more time with the QR code? Like I said, you can also use the link in the chat. Okay. So today we are going to spend some time thinking about research about motivation, especially as it relates to autonomy and authority in coursework. We're going to talk about several kinds of assignments that can promote autonomy and or authority. And I've tried to be as discipline inclusive as I can. I am, of course, a humanist, and so some of these examples are humanist, but I'm going to really rely on all y'all to help me find additional examples as well that could promote autonomy and or authority. And we're going to spend some time together imagining and designing assignments that we can build into upcoming courses that both meet our learning goals and encourage students to develop expertise and make meaningful choices. So that's what we're going to try to accomplish in our time together today. I hope that as we go through, if you have questions, that you will either unmute and ask, put them in the chat, whatever feels most comfortable, do the little hand raising thing, and we'll try to get to as many of those and have as much conversation around these things as possible. All right, so first we want to talk a little bit about autonomy. And what I mean by autonomy in an academic sense is that assignments that promote autonomy promote self-determination. They promote the ability to make choices, and they present for students a sense of agency. That is, they get to have control over some aspects of their learning experience. Autonomy is really critical in terms of assignment design because it increases intrinsic, especially goal-oriented motivation. I mean, this is not hard to imagine, but all the research tells us that if you have an assignment that promotes autonomy, it's more likely to encourage students and motivate students to play to their strengths, to identify what their strengths are, to think in terms of who they are and what they value. It gives them a time and a space to think about and reflect on those choices and what they might do differently next time. And all of these things, this sort of goal orientation, the value, seeing the value of the task or how it could be valuable to them, and especially this intrinsic motivation is really, really critical. And this all comes out of autonomy. So an autonomous assignment that promotes autonomy might say, these are the goals of the assignment, but there are many paths to meet those goals. Rather than having an assignment that just says, this paper needs to be 12 to 15 pages long, you know, that might not promote as much autonomy as saying, hey, this assignment allows you to choose the way you want to share the information that you've gathered that might otherwise go into a paper. Certainly, if you did assign a paper, something like, you know, having students really think about, choose, and investigate what the topic of that paper is going to be based on their experience, based on some process of reflection. That sense of self, right, that sense of self-determination is really critical to what this is all about. And at the end of the slides, and you might see that if you've pulled up the slides from the chat, there's just a whole host of papers and research and studies that all indicate that autonomy is just critical. The ability to make some self-determinations, whether it's about an assignment, whether it's about a process, whether it's about who to work with, all of these kinds of things promote student agency and allow our students to really feel motivated because they aren't just passive recipients in the process. Authority is really, it involves that base word there, authorship, right? Author. Authority here means this person, the student, feels that they can author, they create knowledge. They're not just passive recipients of knowledge. And further, that they feel that that knowledge is valued, is important, is seen by the community as worthwhile, as expertise, right? And that all of these things kind of fall under this umbrella term authority. Giving students authority in the classroom is allowing them to be the experts, to share expertise, and to value that expertise. As you can imagine, this is critically important to students' feelings of belonging. When students are challenged to be the expert in the classroom, then all of a sudden they feel like who they are and what they know, their experiences, where it comes from, what they've learned, that is valued. So assignments that might promote authority might be things like setting up thoughtful peer review systems, right? Where students are invited to be the expert on another student's paper, like give expertise about, hey, have you thought about reorganizing your paper this way, right? Inviting students to lead discussion, and even more authority by inviting them to not just lead discussion of your materials, but lead discussion of materials that they have chosen themselves, to be the expert for the day. And I do this in a lot of my classes where I say, you will be expected to be the authority, the expert in the classroom. And we scaffold to that, we build to that. But eventually by the end of the class, to really have students taking authority for the kinds of materials, kinds of choices, the kinds of products that come out of the classroom. Before we move on to actual assignments, what questions do you have about either what we mean by autonomy here or what we mean by authority? Okay, I'm going to continue then, but feel free to keep asking questions in the chat. One thing you'll notice about me is I'm not afraid of some good silence. It's thinking space. And so I'm not going to rush anything, but I'm not seeing it at this point. So we're going to press on to the next space. All right. So this is my exceedingly rough plotting of ways that we could enhance authority or autonomy in classrooms. And we're going to focus on assignments particularly, but obviously this can happen in a lot of ways, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be around assignments. For example, one of the things that I do in my classrooms to promote authority and autonomy is I invite students to build with me our class policies, our class norms. We do the goals. I think Sadie's here. She does that as well with her students to encourage their authority in the classroom, their expertise. And all of these things, so they don't necessarily have to be assignments. So there's other ways to incorporate authority and autonomy in your class. But, I just want to kind of walk through some assignment examples. And then I'm not going to get to all of them, but I will point out several that I think are important. And then I'm going to invite you to ask questions about some of the others or why I might have put them in this very, very rough plotting. If we want to start at that bottom left corner, right, the least amount of authority where student expertise is included, and the least amount of autonomy might be like a multiple choice test where the teacher, T stands for teacher, by the way, and S for student, so that we're clear on those little shorthands I had in there so that we had enough space. So a teacher designed multiple choice test doesn't really invite a student expertise. It doesn't invite their voice. It sends the message that you have received knowledge, and now I'm going to ask you. Now, that's not to say that there aren't spaces for quizzes. It's really important sometimes to have quizzes because quizzes or short check-in tests or multiple choice things can really make students, give them a chance to do recall, practice, right? These kinds of things are pretty important as well as we're building knowledge. So just because it's lower on the authority or autonomy scale doesn't mean that it's bad. Like there's no bad here. It just is not likely to produce the kinds of motivation gains or belonging gains we would see. So instead, we might move from there, like after maybe a couple of where I design the quiz or this test or multiple choice, right? We might move sort of toward this middle area here, right? Where our students are starting to design our exams or tests, right? They're being asked to say, what questions would you have on this exam? What should we make sure that we're including, right? Asking students to author questions for the test, not just receive them. Asking students to have some choice in what they want to think is important, right? Asking them to do that reflective work on like, why was this is a critical piece to the class. Why was it so critical that it should be on the exam? So we could move by drawing on students' authorship of design of exam questions. And I will say, one thing that I've noticed from folks, even if they can't move entirely to student design exams, a great question you can ask that encourages authority and autonomy is, what question do you wish was on this exam? Or what did you study that I didn't ask you here? What kind of question would you ask and how would you answer it? That's giving students a chance to show what they know, right? Talk about what they studied, make a self-determination about what they want to share with you, and giving them some authority and authorship. So there could be, pretty middle ground in there as well. So that's some right there. Another one that might be a little lower is none of my colleagues here do this, but oh, thank you for putting the link to the slides in there again, Barbara. Much appreciated. I have worked at institutions previously where labs were really just worksheets with predetermined answers, and everything was already solved and worked out perfectly. Those predetermined results are decreasing both students' authority and autonomy, right? Messy labs, messy data sets might allow for more kinds of authority and autonomy, things where there aren't neat solutions. If you've not read Creating Wicked Students by Paul Hanstead, he talks a lot about this idea of messy problems, and that problems with predetermined answers really aren't going to create the kind of authority and autonomy amongst our students that critical thinking we want to produce in our students. A little higher up on the authority might be if you ask your students to write a reflection on their own experience, but you write the prompt, right? Sure, that's going to give them some authority. It's going to say, yes, your experience, your knowledge that you've gained is valuable, but maybe not as much autonomy, not as much choice. You might increase that by saying, we're going to reflect on your experience in conjunction with or in collaboration with these resources we've been discussing and you've been providing in class, and you're going to choose which ones are most relevant to that reflection and include those as examples or support or something like that, right? So inviting students' autonomy there, as well as their authorship or authority, might be another way to increase that. Certainly, asking students to choose one of 3 essays offers more autonomy, it offers more choice, right? But it certainly doesn't increase authority, because you're not letting students construct knowledge. You're still choosing to predetermine what the options are. Again, this is not necessarily bad. Students sometimes need that scaffolding, that framework, that space to start. And then once they have some of that practice, then we can move toward things. Obviously, we're not going to put our students in a spot where they're just like, hey, you're going to design your own capstone research project. That is a terrible plan, because while that could produce authority and autonomy, a sense of motivation and belonging, like they were contributing real things, right? If we just set them out there to do that first, without ever seeing what a research project looks like or what a research article looks like, without ever talking them through how to do the kind of research, right? What are the methods and so forth, then we've set them up to fail. And that is very demotivating for students. A couple I mentioned in the title of this talk that I want to get to. One thing that is pretty important, especially in the humanities and social sciences right now, is instead of having a final paper, right? I don't know about when you went to college, but when I went to college, it was in my humanities classes, 2 papers and a final, right? Or sometimes just 2 tests and a final paper. But instead of having that final paper that gets turned in after one draft that I stayed up all night writing, you know the one, and never gets seen or heard from again, faculty are inviting their students to do unessays, which is basically anything but an essay to show what you've learned. I like unessay celebrations in collaboration with this. So students use what they learned in the course to produce something, right? So giving them some authorship and authority. They get to choose the medium for that project. For example, I was just in Janine and Jen session on open resource pedagogy, and they were talking about storyboard, which is a way students can build a story on a map and use that to tell, right? So they have all these maps in ArcGIS, and then you can add these elements to sort of talk about, I don't know, a neighborhood, right? Where, in my case, I teach religious studies, so where certain important religious events took place, right? Or where different religious communities, something like that. And then to have a celebration of all of those, so that the last day of class is not a final exam where people hand it in and disappear, but instead where it's open to the public in some way. The students get to share what they've done, what they've created and produced, and they get to get live feedback from folks, right? So it's not just a class presentation at the end, but like an open, anybody can come or, you know, join us on Zoom to discuss the project that the student has created that uses the information they learned. Another one that I think is pretty valuable in all classes. In fact, I know Megan Zernstein is going to be doing this with her computer science students, is a student design portfolio where they get to, whatever assignments you have in the class, they then get to curate and make reflective notes on. This is what I did. This is what I'll do next. This is what this is how I used that in the previous one. And it all comes together in an electronic portfolio that students then present at the end of the semester, which shows the process of creation, revision, and allows them to use their authorship and their voice, their expertise, their knowledge, and share that with others in ways that help other people as well. Okay, like I said, I'm going to pause here and give you a chance to ask questions about any of these other kinds of assignments, why I put them where I did. Sometimes it was just a space issue, or why I might change the authority or autonomy of any of these. Yeah, okay, thanks for the question about, so student selected due dates. I do this with my students. Like I said, we talk about assignments, we talk about class policies and all those kinds of things. My syllabus tends to be a sort of outline skeleton-y kind of thing until we flesh it out. Wow, that was pretty graphic. And so one of the things that we talk about is, so now that we know what the assignments are, and now that we know how they fit in the class and how they meet our class goals. Where's the best place to have this due? And I invite my students to look at other assignments they have coming up. And we negotiate due dates, due times. Like students in classes can be very different. Like some students really want it to be due at 5 o'clock on Friday so they can go out and have a good weekend. Some students really want it to be due at 11:59 p.m. on Sunday, so that they can have the whole weekend. And that's great. And I'm certainly not gonna be like deeply concerned one way or the other, right? But if it gives them a sense of autonomy, like they've made choices, they know when things are due because of that. I also sometimes have assignments that are due with multiple possible due dates. So I invite, for example, I taught a world religions class in which students were put in small groups and each had one religion that they wrote a research project on. And so if they chose Hinduism was the first religion we talked about. And so then their research project was due, their research paper was due first, sort of the end of that unit. And then if they chose Buddhism, that would be next. If they chose Judaism, that would be next. If they chose Islam, that would be next. And that allows students some autonomy and also flexibility around their schedule. Because if they see their other syllabi that maybe aren't as flexible, like, this is when we're going to take this exam, then they can build in that sort of, well, phew, I don't have to do an exam and have this paper done on the same day. Great. So I'm looking at the questions in the chat. How do authority and autonomy assignments influence rubric development? This is a great question. It can influence it as much or as little as you want, but I think that if we're really serious about giving students authority and autonomy, that part of that authority and autonomy should be in the creation of the evaluation mechanism. So I do, if guidelines, we co-create those in my classes, and I have a pretty handy chart that I can send out to you all with that information about how to do that in a really quick manner, like 15 minutes at the beginning of class. And then the nice thing is the students also know that what you're actually grading on, if you use a grading rubric, but they've also had some choice in making sure that you are grading on things that they value as well. So you can certainly have a high authority and autonomy assignment that you then create the rubric for, but obviously it makes more sense. The other thing about some of these things, like Unessays, is that they aren't one format, right? So if your rubric in the past was, well, this is a paper, it has to be 12 to 15 pages and 10 sources and 12-point font, and that was your rubric or a big part of your rubric, that's not going to be possible because students are doing different things. So then you're going to need to talk and reevaluate and renegotiate around learning goals rather than those sort of factors that might be on a rubric for only one kind of project. Diana's question is, can you give us some other examples of unessays? Unessays can be as broad as you like. I've had students, so I taught a class on gender theory and methods that had this unessay component at the end. And students, one group of students wrote letters to the presidents and dean of the college I was at the time, and students affairs and others, a series of letters talking about sexual assault on campus and resources that they wish the campus would provide around sexual assault and support of victims. And then they, in their final celebration that we did, they displayed those letters and the responses that they got and the responses that they sent, sort of showing their grasp of sexual assault on campus. And the research that went into that was brilliant and powerful, but it was also community facing. I've had students do in a death and immortality class that I taught. I I had students do museum walkthroughs. So they got pictures of, right, like sculptures or sepulchres or other kinds of things from various historical periods related to death and immortality, and then in a single museum, and then they did a walkthrough, and so they did voiceover with that material. So it can be, I mean, just as long as it's meeting the goals for the learning in the class, it really could be just about anything. Do you know of a good open source portfolio software? I've used a Sakai hack, but maybe there's something better out there. Okay, this is going to sound super basic, but Google Docs works really well. It can, and you can pretty it up. I was telling the Ungrading Book Club that we actually started using Google portfolios for promotion and tenure at my previous institution, and they work just super well, and they're super easy to edit. There's not a lot of stress associated with that on the student side. I imagine that one challenge, Liz says, or barrier might be thinking about how to evaluate a wide range of media formats assignments in a fair and equitable way. Yes, and thank you for bringing that up again, because like I said, we have to step back from feeling like that page count is somehow magically shows equivalent work, which is why I set up these assignments very clearly connected to learning, transparent learning goals. This is why we're doing, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is how you can show me that you've met that learning goal. And then that autonomy is really about saying, I trust you to do this and to show me how you did it. Sometimes some of these require additional reflection or an author's note or something like that, or a videographer's note that says, this is how I met the learning goals. But that kind of metacognition is important too. And I do entrust students with that. That's part of decentering myself and giving students more authority and autonomy. And since I've started doing this, as long as I have really transparent, clear learning goals, I think I can count on one hand in 12 years the number of students who have said, well, I did more work than so-and-so, or it's not fair, because they got to choose, right, how they approach the learning goals. And so I can say to them, this is a choice you made. You showed me you learned. That's great. And so it doesn't become a fairness issue. And then that was, Andrea says, I love all these alternative ideas to assignments. I love the idea of end of class performance. Yeah, thank you for that comment. Yeah, it really, that's the whole point, is that students are more motivated, they're more excited. I think we lost just a ton of joy recently. And I hope that this is a way to bring back that enthusiasm, that joy, that feeling of accomplishment. And it really does create communities and collaborators rather than people who are competitive with each other. We get excited about each other's projects, we learn from each other, and that can be really, really important. Yeah, thank you for all of those excellent questions and comments. This is fantastic. Okay, I'm going to try to do something exciting now. Watch me go. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to do a whiteboard. Have you seen the Zoom whiteboard before? I've done this exactly 2 times in my teaching life here, so yay me. And then, cool. So far so good. Can you see the text options at the top? A stamp and eraser? No, you cannot. Oh, can somebody remind me if you go to whiteboard?
If as a user, you go to view options and then annotate, and then it should be there. I have used it almost every day that I was teaching online.
And I have to do that, or you have to do that?
We have to do that. So if you near the top, there's view options. If you click on that, and then in that list that drops down, there's annotate, and that brings up the pen and stuff.
Sherry saves our lives. Thank you very much. Okay, so say I draw a more authority line this way, and a more autonomy line this way. If you were to think about assignments you've either done or want to do in your class, what assignments have you done, or what else could we add that might be idea generating for each other? So I might put, draw a little text box and add it in there that says like final celebrations, right? And then that will be added to the thing, and we can save them so we have lots and lots of ideas. Are we able to get the toolbar? Yes, okay. All right, so I'm going to give you 4 or 5 minutes to think about assignments that promote more authority, more autonomy, or both that you've already done or that you've heard about, and add those to this whiteboard. Let's take 5 minutes.
So Jessica, just to confirm the, oh shoot, what's X and what's Y? the vertical is.
Yeah, that's a great point. I will add that.
Thank you.
Oopsie. And I will.
Jessica, just to clarify, are we adding new ideas compared to the graph that you already shared with us, or are we just adding anything, even if it's already included on the graph? You're very, very rough plotting.
My very, very rough plotting. If you have additional ideas, that would be so great, so that we can build an even bigger database. But if there are things that you've used really effectively, and especially if there are things that I put on the slide that you would put somewhere else, that would be very welcomed as well. So I guess the answer is there are many ways to be successful.
How autonomous and authority of you.
That's right. I'm going for it. Nice. Lovely. Maybe 2 more minutes. Mhm. At the end of that little bit of time, I'm going to ask you if you would like to either share what you included or ask questions of others about what they included. So if you're done adding and you want to take a minute to look them over and sort of say, oh, I'm interested in that.
Jessica, are you able to move some of these things because they're overlapping and it's difficult to read?
I believe so.
Thank you.
I believe I can't. This is exciting. Like I said, I'm learning new things too. Let's see. There we go. Maybe not.
It's really hard to move the text around, right?
Doesn't seem to want to let me.
Yeah.
So we may have to rely on some people to share. I don't think I can. Okay. So maybe let's take a minute now. If there's one that you wanted to share, especially if yours maybe overlapped with someone else's and you need to clarify for us, or if you have a question for somebody else, let's do that now. Question is, cure. What is cure? Who wrote that one?
Sorry, I was stuck on the writing. I couldn't figure out how to unmute. So I wrote about the cure. I'm not sure how wide this is outside of science. I'm in science. So CURE stands for course-based undergraduate research experience. So the definition is that it's a learning experience in which classes of students address a research question or a problem with unknown outcomes or solutions that are of interest to external stakeholders. So what I do is I partner with a faculty member who has like an ongoing research program, and we take a subset of that, and then students kind of do their own little mini research projects with real undetermined outcomes. I also have them write their own proposals, so it's also very authoritative, but you can set it up in a lot of different ways.
Thank you, Sadie. Other folks want to reflect on their own things that they added or ask questions of others?
I love this idea of letters to the future self. I've done versions of that because it seems like a really cool way to also establish goals, or, have the students like, I'm just wondering if the faculty member who had that assignment could share a bit more about the prompt and how that went.
I put that in, Andrea. So hi, I'm Barbara. In organizational theory last semester they did a final project, an essay, and then on top of that, I also had them write a letter to themselves in the next imagine yourself in the future. It's 7 years from now. So someone once told me, and I tried to find evidence that this is true and I couldn't find it, but a professor of mine when I was in graduate school once said, 7 years from now, students will forget most of the things that they learned. 7 years after graduation, most students will forget the things that they learned in college. So I use that as my opening. I say, the research shows, however, I don't know if that's true because I couldn't find it documented anywhere. So I said, what do you want to hold on from our class? What ways of being and what knowledge, what practices do you expect to hold yourself accountable to implementing in your life 7 years from now? So I said, and you just choose 3 things, whatever 3 things those are. And you could write that letter however you want. It could say, dear future self, and you could say I and you. It could be a traditional essay. It could be whatever you want. And it was interesting, like the range of things that students focused on. So we used metaphorical analysis in that class. So some students were like, the 3 metaphors that I hope to use as my vision as a organizational leader are these 3. And some other students said, you know, I want to do check-ins, or I want to make sure that at meetings with wherever I am, that we're doing meditations, or there's a variety of things, but they all were things that we did in class. And I said, okay, so imagine you have this letter. And so what if you printed it out and you carried it around with you in your pocket, or you put it in your wallet to say, like, this is really important for me and I want to keep it. And so in moments of distress or uncertainty, you could take that letter out and read it and then become regrounded. What would you want to put in that letter? Yeah. And then I had one student who wrote a letter from their future self to their present self. Like, don't worry, but you know, I'm looking at you from the future, and I'm going to tell you all the great things that you did. And actually that was very, very touching to me. That one made me cry. It was really beautiful.
Thank you, Barbara. Liz would like to hear more about choosing case studies to test a theory. Who shared that one with us?
Yeah, I don't know. This was my, for a class that I taught this past semester in the fall in radical care for first-year students. And I felt like they needed to have an introduction to academic writing because they would be asked to do this a lot. We're a social science school, so that's a really common move in academic writing, but I wanted to give them wide latitude to choose their own case study. So they read some theories on radical care that came out in social text, and gave them sort of a theoretical language for thinking about that. And I asked them to identify a case of radical care or a crisis of care. And I modeled for them ways to curate a case study. So we actually spent 3 class sessions, you know, just some of them was me sort of spontaneous. Okay, here's a Pitzer policy that came out. And I want you to read this through the lens of care. What do you see? What's missing? What does the theory open up? But what does it close off? You know, and then also I modeled for them ways to curate different kinds of sources they could look at, a video, a podcast episode, had them choose things to look at and then come together with their analysis, but also made sure that I had us talking about one thing together as a class so that they would have the intellectual move modeled, and then modeled how the best version of this kind of assignment would not just show how a theory applies, but show the limitations of the theory. So how can you, in the final move of your essay, really ask a question? What question does this case study open up for you that could extend the research, right, in a new direction? So I thought it was good. And I did something that I worked well for me. I taught this first class when we were fully online. And then I taught it again this semester, and I thought, or in the fall semester, and I thought both worked really well. And one thing that I discovered is, oh gosh, I've totally forgot what I was going to say. I don't know. I'm not ready for the semester to start. I'm still in my pajamas, you know, like I forgot what I was going to say, but yeah, I don't know. The assignment worked well. Oh, I know what I did. I flipped it. I usually build up towards the hardest assignment, and I started with the hardest assignment. But it would draw on some of their expertise because I knew that it just seemed like energies was waning more in our current moment. So I tried to make the first assignment kind of more robust and harder and more extended. And then the other ones were shorter after it. So.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we're all kind of feeling you about it's time to start the semester. That's why we got a lot of those kinds of cats. Anybody else want to ask a question about someone else's or explain a little bit more about their submission? I am going to save these, and that'll be part of the materials that I send out to you all after, so you can have access to those as well. Great. Cool. Oh, Liz, please.
Yeah, I can't take credit for this. This is a former colleague of mine. I wrote, it's overlapping too, so I'll say it out loud, which is students write proposals for a a chosen initiative or improvement on campus. And your example of the letters to the president reminded me of this. This was an engineering professor that I worked with, and he assigned students basically to look at our campus and see where they could find improvements for sustainability. And then he had them present their reports to the director of sustainability. And so maybe that's a little more authority than autonomy, but I love assignments where students are doing something that is quote unquote real world. I mean, it's all the real world, but that has an immediate impact on the environment that they are in. So I think that does require some sort of trust and some relationship building. But I thought it was really wonderful to see these presentations.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, that's just such a critical thing for students to see, and related to authority and autonomy, but certainly related to motivation. When students see that one, other people care about the things that they care about, and two, the things that they care about matter to changing things that have always been. I mean, that's what motivates us, right? The idea that by our work with students or by our work in our communities, we can make substantive change. Things can be better somehow, and that's incredibly motivating. And so it shouldn't surprise us at all that it's incredibly motivating to other kinds of humans as well, like our students. Okay, thank you for all of these. I've saved that, and I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare my. There we go. Okay. There we go. So the final part of our time together, I do want to give you some time for thinking. And like I said, the key to transforming assignments toward authority and autonomy is not just for the sake of those things, but because doing those things means students will be more motivated to do the learning that is a part of your class. So we always want to connect our goals for the course to our assignments anyway. I think that's just really, really important. Oh, thank you for that Unessays information, Diana. Oops. That's interesting. There we go. So I think it's really important that we always connect our learning goals to our assignments so that students can see why we're doing the thing we're doing. Very often with sort of low autonomy and low authority assignments especially, but just in general, we just say, well, we're going to write 2 papers because that's the way this class has always been done, right? And that's not a good enough reason. We assign things because they help students toward our learning goals. So we always want to be thinking about that first. And then along that, to encourage your students to be more motivated to meet that learning goal, to feel a better sense of community, belonging, authority, right? All of those kinds of things. What's one place you could enhance that motivation and belonging by adding more? Or by scaffolding in another opportunity. Remember, I said we don't always have to be up there at the top right corner. In fact, that might not be a good idea. But we should maybe be building toward that, that possibility by scaffolding maybe some of those assignments that at first, sure, we're providing, right, the material. But then after students have a chance to practice with that a little bit, then maybe they can start to provide some of that material or some responses to it or something like that. So I do want to give you a little time to think, but also to ask any final questions you might have. So let's take, what are we doing on time here? Oh, and my references are at the end. I'm going to stop sharing. We're running out of time. So let's take 3 minutes. And just for 3 minutes, spend a little time thinking about one place in our current syllabus, our syllabus for next semester, that we could add more authority, autonomy, or both, or like scaffold to it, like I just said. And then maybe I'll ask folks to share kind of preliminary thoughts And then we'll be done for today. So 3 minutes, sounds good?
And Jessica, just a reminder, I think we have till 11:45.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah,
So
I just want
a lot of time, yeah.
Yeah, we're good. And I think, yes, thank you for that reminder. I'll put the questions back up if people want to look at them. So 3 good minutes. I'll give you one more bonus minute and then we'll maybe chat with each other a little bit about how things are going. Okay, maybe finish up the thought you're working on right now. All right. So I'd like to open it up. Any initial sort of places that they they ran into ideas for possibilities for improving or enhancing authority and autonomy in their classes. Anything that they noticed as they were working through this assignment thinking time? Oh, Barbara, please.
So I thought about portfolios, and so I'm in organizational studies at Pitzer, and we have one class that's sort of like a capstone, but it's more future oriented. It's called The Nature of Work. And one of the things we've been talking about is having a capstone experience for students. Some students write theses if they want to do honors, or if they're script students, they have to write theses, but many students don't. And the field, our department, or the major is very decentralized. So students can choose different paths, they take different classes. And so there's no culminating shared experience. And our conversation today made me think, like, maybe I'm inspired to create a capstone course where one of the assignments is to put together a portfolio of students' learning experiences across the four years. And we could use something like, the organizational studies student learning outcomes, but then students could also write down, well, what was their hope when they first went to college, and the outcomes don't have to also only be cognitive, but they could be emotional or community-based, affective, like human growth, like how you've become a human or a better human or more comfortable in your skin or develop certain things that you didn't think you could do. And then have them include sample work and maybe comments and reflections on that work across the 4 years. It could be maybe on storyboard, or it could be paper and collage and markers, or it could be on Google Docs. And then thinking about, we could end with like areas that students want to continue developing. So maybe part of that would be your letter to your future self.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought maybe one great way to practice authority and autonomy is I could do it too.
Yeah.
With them. Like I could say, because I've been at Pitzer now 5 years. So I could say, how have I changed and grown? And then we could do at the end that beautiful thing, the Unessay celebration of our journeys. I think that would be really fun. So thank you. I got inspired. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. That's a great idea. I will add to, if it's not possible to make it into a capstone course, the college I went to, we had to build portfolios to complete the graduation requirements for the degree, but it was done outside of any individual class, but we still did that process of building a portfolio, making a claim on our learning, all those kinds of things. So in case adding a capstone maybe takes a little time, which sometimes adding classes does, then that might be an intermediate option as well. But yeah, it would be great to have it be part of the class. Sadie's asking if anyone has a good example of a guided reflection for portfolios. I have a whole book about it that I'm happy to share with you. I'm a big fan of portfolios. I think it's a really fantastic way for students to make choices about their learning. So, but I'll make sure that I download some relevant chapters and send those on to you, Sadie. And I mean, you don't have to read the whole thing. I'm not giving you homework, but that might spark some discussion for you, or some thoughts for you about how to do the reflection for portfolios. What is storyboard? Good question. Was that the thing I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if that's what it's called, but you had mentioned it in the other session.
Yeah, it's basically just through ArcGIS. It's a way of telling a story using visually creating a story or a series of like say you would have a map. Say I was teaching urban religion, right? I might have a map of Los Angeles or Austin or New York or something like that. And the students could add into that storyboard, right, various religious events, historical religious events, or important centers of religious practice or things like that, to kind of create this multimedia. They can add videos in there, all kinds of stuff. It's kind of fantastic. Yes, of course, everybody who wants to learn more about portfolios, I'd love to. Anybody else? Oh, yes, Liz, please.
So I'm from the library, and one thing that I struggle, I think sometimes to connect students with is that they think of academic sort of okay, so one of my learning goals is one of the library's learning goals is for students to evaluate information, right, for a specific purpose. And so I think a lot of times students think, oh, well, if this is for academic use, it's a completely different thing than when I evaluate information for other kinds of uses. And so one thing I've been thinking about is, this is a smaller scale thing, obviously, but expanding something that I've done before, which is just ask students to think about a time they've done research that has nothing to do with school. Maybe it was researching where to live, or a job, or something medical, or something like that. And what are the steps, what are their criteria for evaluating the information that they're getting? How do they decide if it's something that they want to act on? And maybe if you have an assignment where you're requiring students to use outside sources, instead of saying like they must be peer reviewed or something like that, build together like, how are we going to decide what we're going to use, when, and how? So that's just, it's a little unfinished, but that was a thought.
And that's such a great way to invest students with authority too, because they already know how to do good stuff, right? I mean, like, they have experience and they can share that with you. And I think that that's so fantastic when we actually invite students to say, you know, you may think it's not the same, but it is. You've been doing research, you've been doing work, you've been doing something, and we can build on that, right? In this context, that's really cool. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to stop sharing here and stop recording.